Hello everybody, welcome back to the Reese Talking YouTube channel. My name is Reese and today is the 8th of November 2025, and in this video I would like to discuss something that I've been wanting to talk about for a very long time, which is the manipulation of the Abrahamic religions for the furtherance of Zionism. The main religion that I believe is being manipulated right now is Christianity. I'm going to come onto that in the final portion of the video, but where I'm going to start off with is Judaism and Islam, and then we're going to go on it from there. Now, just to clarify, I am an atheist. A lot of people know I am an atheist, and I do not see myself, or you might say pagan, right? You might call me a pagan. I might say I'm a pagan. Now, I don't know enough about paganism to actually say that I'm a pagan. However, for the benefit of the video, for the benefit of argument, I'm just letting you know that I am an atheist, and this is coming from an atheist perspective. So you might say that there is a bit of bias there. And but that doesn't mean that if you are religious you can't watch the video, you can't gain maybe a bit of insight, and you can't listen or understand what I'm saying. So effectively, as I say, the manipulation of religion for the furtherance of Zionism. Now, I believe that with Judaism and Islam it's very simple, but they are different. So Judaism is the H-course narrative, and this idea that Jewish people are oppressed and they are victims, and they require a state. They require an area of land where they can live so that another H-course doesn't happen. Now, I'm not going to start denying anything or saying any numbers, anything like that, right? But what I am saying is that this is manipulation, and this happens to a lot of people in the Jewish community, because it is instilling fear in them to kind of enable a pretense to develop a Jewish state. Now, in theory, right, a homeland for the Jewish people doesn't sound that bad. It doesn't sound bad at all. If anything, it sounds good and virtuous, a homeland for the Jewish people. And I think that most people, if you told them, well, do you believe in a homeland for the Jewish people? I think most people would think, well, yeah, I believe that they should be able to live somewhere where they don't fear persecution. They don't fear any kind of H-course happening or anything like that. But that's not what Zionism actually is. Zionism is a colonial idea. It is get power of the institutions worldwide across Europe and America, control the politics, take the money, and enact Greater Israel. And so part of that is convincing the Jewish community that if this doesn't happen, then there might be another H-course. Therefore, it's necessary for our own survival. Jewish people are convinced that if they don't have a state, then they're not going to be able to exist. It's necessary for their survival. Basically, the main way I would say that Judaism is being manipulated to further a colonial agenda, to further Greater Israel, but using the pretense of we need to have a state because otherwise we're going to have another H-course. So obviously I don't want to get too into it, but that's kind of my viewpoint on how Judaism is being manipulated currently. Then you've got Islam. Now, Islam, I don't know too much about it as I don't know much about most of these religions. I think that gives me a unique perspective. One thing I know about Islam is that it is conquest, similarly to Zionism, and you might say Judaism, but it is conquest, and I believe that Islam currently is being manipulated to brown Europe, to make it so that the white and the main opposition to Zionism is eradicated. You might refer to the Kalergi plan. You might refer to Barbara Specter. You might say, well, Barbara Specter said that Europe will become multicultural and Jews will be at the center of that. And if that's true, and Islam is a big part of it, then you might say that Islam is being manipulated by Zionism and Zionists to brown the European nations and to make it so that Islam is in contention with Christianity and the host nation's values, and cause civil disruption. Now, obviously we're seeing civil disruption, and that is pushed further, propagated more by people like Tommy Robinson, Liam Tufts, Danny Tomo, and these other people in the media when they say, or when they talk, right? They use the words modern warfare. They use war. They use these warlike terms all the time, these people. And, who is Tommy Robinson? Tommy Robinson is a Zionist who would fight for the IDF, who has been to Israel. I don't know if he's still in Israel, but he has been in Israel for a very long time this year, doing a tour, getting a propaganda tour, selling a book. And Tommy Robinson's job is to sell the people of, England, Britain, Europe, but mainly obviously the UK, that Islam is a big threat to them. And as a result of that, they need to have Zionism because otherwise they're not going to be able to eradicate the threat of radical Islamism, which is in the Middle East. So Islam is being manipulated in kind of multiple ways, in the way that they are browning Europe, and it's the conquest ideology of Islam that says we want more power, at least part of it. Part of the ideology of Islam is more power, more dominance. We are not here to participate, we're here to take over. People like Zoran Mamdani are a perfect example, because Zoran Mamdani also has been elected as mayor in New York, and he has been seen with the hat on, and he's been endorsed by rabbis, and he's received money from George Soros. So you have to ask yourself, is this being received well by the Jewish community in New York, or at least the elitist Jewish community in New York? And if so, why? Why is it that a Muslim being in power would be received well by Jews in New York? Well, maybe because we're seeing swastikas getting painted, graffitied, graffiti swastikas in New York. What does that mean? It means, there's anti-Semitism on the rise in New York. What does that mean? It means anti-Semitism laws. It means crackdown on free speech. Maybe there's going to be some pro-Palestinian protesters in New York, inorganic ones at that, like the ones that we've seen in London, where they have the sign in their hands that guarantees them to get arrested, which I've spoken about a lot before. And what did that do in this country? Well, it made it so that the police had more powers to crack down on protests. And you might see the Trump administration use some sort of military force in New York or in other areas. When you see rises in anti-Semitism or pro-Palestine protests, and that is coming as a manipulation of Islam, because obviously Muslims have an issue with what's going on in the Middle East, and there's tension there, and there's potential for civil unrest, and that is exactly what they need, because then they have more power over the countries that they are taking money from. Combine that with the browning, as I say, the feeling that these people have that the Europeans are the biggest threat to their Zionist colonialism, and that they believe that, white Europeans are anti-Semitic in their blood. A lot of them, they've said that. And you've got a manipulation there of Islam in two different ways to further the cause of Zionism. And then finally, with regard to Christianity, I've got a few points I want to make on this. So obviously there's the Christian Zionist movement, there's the Judeo-Christian movement, which is an oxymoron, obviously. And it's this idea that Israel is the Holy Land, and therefore we must support them because God, Jesus, Bethlehem, la la la. Right, so there is that. But then there's also the manipulation of people who believe in miracles, people who believe in God. And this goes back to Donald Trump's assassination attempt. And I want you to think about this. If you are religious and you're watching this, I would ask you this, especially if you're a Christian. I would ask you, what happened on that day when Donald Trump was almost assassinated? So a sniper got up there, took a shot. Donald Trump just moved his head and he survived. And they said it was an act of God. It was divine intervention. It was a miracle. I remember because I was making a YouTube video about it at the time when it happened, when I was practicing before coming onto social media in the first place. I remember making a YouTube video saying, why are all these Americans saying that it's an act of God? It doesn't make sense to say that it's an act of God, which I'm about to outline. So it's an act of God that the bullet grazed his ear as opposed to missing him completely. It's an act of God that the bullet grazed his ear as opposed to the bullet didn't get shot at all. But then you've got to think about the fact that there was a Christian father who died in the audience. So it's an act of God when the bullet misses the savior, Donald Trump, who is a Zionist, who is serving Zionism, and instead hits a Christian father and kills him. Now, I would argue that that is an act of the devil. If someone takes a shot and it hits a Christian man who is a father and he dies, I would argue that that is actually an act of the devil. And yet, the establishment in America said that it was an act of God and it was divinity and God saved Trump. Now, there's the second part of this, which is Charlie Kirk. They said because the bullet didn't go through Charlie Kirk, in other words, because a bullet that should have decapitated him didn't decapitate him and it defied all laws of physics, and the bullet that would have taken out multiple cement blocks, concrete blocks, didn't even go through a human being's bone, then it was a miracle. That's what they said. And this is using and manipulating people's belief in miracles. It prevents you from diverting away from the mainstream narrative. Again, they are saying it's miraculous, which would imply divinity, which would imply an act of God. Prevented the bullet from going through Charlie Kirk. But again, if God is intervening here, then I would argue it's actually the devil. I would argue that it's actually an evil force that's intervening, not a good one, because a man is dead. If you believe that miracles are real and that one prevented a bullet from going through Charlie Kirk, and you believe in Jesus Christ and you believe in God, and that cements your belief in the Bible. And what does it say in the Bible? If you bless Israel, you'll be blessed. If you curse Israel, you'll be cursed. It further cements your viewpoint that Israel is the holy land, that there is any land that's holy, and if there is one, then it's Israel, and it must be protected. It must be defended against. It must be helped. We must serve them in as many ways as we can. Using miracles to manipulate people. Well, this was just a miracle. Well, this was just a miracle. But also, they make it so that it establishes further, cements your belief further in holiness, the Holy Land, and therefore defending Israel and furthering Zionism. Miracles being used to sell you a lie, and miracles being used to cement your belief in Christianity, and therefore the Holy Land, and therefore defending the Holy Land. And before I do head off actually on this video, I just want you to think about Tommy Robinson and Liam Tufts and Ricky Doolin and how they are pushing Christianity. Young Bob is masquerading as a Christian. Why? Because it serves Zionism. They coincidentally have an issue with Islam, and they are pushing Christianity. I'm sure it has nothing to do with Zionism. Christianity is being manipulated in this country and in America, and it's blatant. It's clear. Once you start to see it, and once you're looking at it kind of from an atheistic point of view, you start to see it all the time. They need to sell you this idea that it's Christians versus Muslims, but in reality, you're both being played by the same Zionist colonial ideology. And you're still both serving the same Zionist prophecy. So, yeah, that's it. That's what I wanted to say in this video. Do let me know what you think in the comments down below. If you did enjoy this video, then make sure you leave a like. I appreciate your time. Appreciate you tuning in. Take care. See you later.